Now, if you look at the front page of today's This Day newspaper, the headline says it all. Concern is mounting over alleged plans by lawmakers in Nigeria to rig the 2023 presidential election ahead of time. The paper says that social critics are worried that federal legislators are planning to rig the ballot through the manipulation of the Electoral Amendment Bill, specifically with reference to Section 50, subsection 2 of the draft bill, which appears to bar the electronic transmission of election results. At least 22 civil society groups, possibly more, have raised the alarm over the alleged plot by the National Assembly to pass the bill without the inclusion of an electronic system of collating election results, something which they say undermines the Electoral Commission's efforts to improve the election results management regime. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the leaders of two of the civil society groups that are raising the alarm about the Electoral Amendment Bill, the country officer and head of the Nigeria office of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, Jude Ilo, and the co-convener of the Center for Liberty, Ariyo-Dare Atoye. Thank you very much indeed to both of you for coming in. Let me start with you, Mr. Atoye. Just briefly set out for us the issues you have with this Electoral Amendment Bill and why you're raising the alarm about it.
Yeah, I think a few days ago I was here and I made it very clear that one major provision that we're actually looking out for is the electronic transmission of results. And before then, we had a document which was, I think, was concluded on the 5th of February by the Joint Committee of the National Assembly. And in that document, Section 50 sub 2 actually provided for a discretionary provision allowing INEC to determine the way and manner in which a result will be transmitted. Now, we are still at that and putting pressure on the National Assembly to expressly capture in the provision to expressly state that results should be transmitted electronically. And we said this based on our experience in 2015 when the card reader was not validated by the Supreme Court in its judgment, and the card reader was more or less like the cynosure of the 2015 election then when Jega was in the saddle. So because of that experience, we said we want this provision to provide expressly for the card reader. We're still at that when this latest development leaked out to the public, and we're shocked when we saw this document that when we're complaining about the provision of giving INEC discretionary power. Now, this has now been further watered down by saying that by preventing INEC from even contemplating the idea of electronic transmission, provided that result will not be transmitted. It was so harrowing, so distasteful. When legislation has gone to the extent of making outright provision barring, it's like asking me to buy a smartphone. And they were also, I think, also a mischievous provision, because the provision said you can do electronic voting, but you cannot transmit results electronically. It's like asking me that I can have a smartphone, but I can't browse with that smartphone. It's Nigeria at this stage. We have the capacity to transmit results. INEC has demonstrated that starting from Nasarawa, Ondo, and Edo State. And INEC has not come out to deny that they do not have the capacity to do this. INEC is relying on science, and the National Assembly, or what we've seen, I don't think they're relying on it. I know that some people have been trying to deny it, but the committee chairmen have not come out to deny this publicly. So we know that something is fishy, and the people who actually made this document public, we have to commend them, because these are courageous Nigerians who believe that Nigerians should know. Right. Ordinarily, this bill will have been presented tomorrow, most likely. And what happened during the PIB, where they bar, or they stop a senator from asking for a vote to be taken? Possibly they will have relied on that and say, let everything just sail. Right. But thank God we were able to. Okay,
let me bring Jude Ilo in. Thank you for joining us. So why do you think they've changed that provision, assuming that is in fact the case? Are you worried that there is a plot to rig the 2023 presidential election, as some have suggested?
So Charles, let's look at the context of this law. The reason why people are insisting on electronic transmission of results is to have a second layer of check. Ordinarily, results are collated at the polling station, then it goes to the ward level, then it goes to the local government, then it goes to the state, and then depending on which election. So this is the process. Through history, this process has been the weakest point in the election day in Nigeria, because we've seen instances where results, when they go from the polling station to the ward level, something changes. When it goes to the ward level to the local government, something changes. So the idea is to then circumvent this process by transmitting results directly from the polling station to INEC database and still do the paperwork all the way. But INEC is then afforded an opportunity to compare numbers. So it will be then easy to say that the result that is coming out from state B or from polling station B is at variance with what was electronically transmitted. And that is enough for you to call for an audit before that result is accepted as being valid. Now, in paper, this is the most decent thing any country, any legislative house will want to do. By circumventing this, by trying to put this, because it is very clear what they want to do. They don't want an electronic transmission of result, and they wrote it clearly. And if you look at the drafting in that section, and if you understand the way drafting goes, that's exclusionary clause came from nowhere. There's nothing that prepares you going from you can do whatever is necessary in conducting an election to, but nothing in this empowers you to do
and
particularly
that clause wasn't there previously.
Right. In the initial drafting. So it simply means, on the face of it, let's not even conjecture, that somebody doesn't want a second layer verification of numbers that are coming from the polling station.
Okay, well, let me bring you in, Mr. Atoye. What would be the reason that somebody would not want the results of the elections to be transmitted electronically? And I have to emphasize that at this point, it's purely speculative, because, I mean, the document that you've seen may not necessarily be the document that's the original one that's going to be presented to the Assembly members when they begin debating it later this week.
See, Chris, we pray that
Charles.
I'm sorry. Charles, we pray this dies in the realm of speculation. We pray. That's our sincere prayer. However, I think to consolidate on what my brother Jude said, if you look at Section 65, it was only Section 50 sub 2 that was affected. There is also Section 65 for you to know that it was a pure racket. When I mean racket, when you have the combination of the two together, you'll be able to see clearly. So Section 65 attempts, the one that was passed in February, attempts to cure what we saw in Imo and I think in Abia, when the returning officer alleged that they declared results under duress and at gunpoint. Now, that Section 65, in the wisdom of the legislatures and I think acting on the advice from INEC, they provided the returning officer still has the power to declare result and it is final, provided that there is a 7-day window for a review. So that gives INEC headquarters the power to look at this result in case there is an abnormality, in case that result has been declared. Now, that section has also been removed in this one that is in contention. Why? Simply because it's like walking to an answer. You want to rig election. I'm just answering your question. You don't want electronic transmission of results. That's one. Another window that is open to INEC to review results in case there is an obvious manipulation, you're also taking that away. So what is the science here? What is the wisdom in doing this? And I think that this is not good for our National Assembly, and I'm happy the way Nigerians have been speaking about this. And I also want to commend the This Day newspaper, which did a very good report on this yesterday.
But I mean, is it just about people wanting to manipulate the election results? Because, I mean, I read somewhere that there is some concern that there are parts of Nigeria where electronically transmitting results will not be possible.
Let me respond to that again. I said science, because science and technologies are very vital here. So there are technologies that are available to Nigerians apart from issue of internet penetration. There is USSD code, just like you send your SMS, INEC can always improvise. And also even let us also meet them at their own point of argument. Their own point of argument is that some area lack internet penetration. But one thing is that they forgot is that even after after concluding the counting of results at the polling unit, this same INEC official will move from point A to point B and to point C. Then why can't they also move from that polling unit to an area where they will be able to access internet, like a sort of a sub-collation center, and able to send and transmit their result to the headquarters? You see, the whole essence is to be able to evacuate results in a manner that will ensure transparency and accountability. Sure. So, and we also do this thing based on statistics. If 60-70% of the country is covered, INEC will make a special arrangement for the other percent that is not covered in terms of how to
I understand what you mean. Let me bring you in, Jude, before we have to take a break. I mean, there is a chance to debate this in the National Assembly this week, isn't there? What opportunities does that offer to Nigerians to reverse this attempt, assuming there is one, to alter that clause?
So, in an ideal world, you would assume that there's going to be a robust debate in the National Assembly, in the Senate actually, to, tackle this, do a proper vote. But we've seen the trajectory of this particular Senate. The inability of the leadership of the Senate to accommodate robust debates, the inability to allow the minority people to have a voice. So there is always that behavior of trying to ram it down the throat.
Right, but if all that is the case, what difference are you going to make? I mean,
so
if it's a fait accompli.
Because, change happens in many ways. Now we are seeing an outcry across the country. Now we're seeing people say clearly that these two specific amendments you've inserted into this law is a clear sign that you want to rig election. So people are putting government on notice. The opposition party is making noise. Civil society is Nigerians are making noise. Because, Charles, let's not forget, election in Nigeria is a crisis. Historically, every election in itself is a crisis. Now you infuse this kind of election with this kind of brazen manipulation to tilt the election in favor of those who are in control of power. It becomes a serious crisis.
Okay.
So that's why we're saying it now, so that both the APC government, both the National Assembly members, both Nigerians understand that the people we've put in the Senate are trying to create the destruction of this country by this provisions.
Please stay with us. We want to talk with you some more. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat about the controversy surrounding Nigeria's Electoral Amendment Bill. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Arise interview. I'm Charles Aniagolu. Now today, the issue of the electoral amendment process is back as a hot topic in Nigeria. That's because, barring any last-minute changes, the National Assembly will pass the electoral amendment bill this week. It's become hugely controversial because a new provision has been introduced into a section of the bill prohibiting the electronic transmission of election results. This has raised alarm across the country, particularly among civil society groups who say that it undermines the Electoral Commission, INEC's, efforts to improve the way it manages its system of delivering election results. There are also other proposals that appear to have been rejected, which it is argued would have helped to improve INEC's efforts to hold free and fair elections. And with me in the studio, the country officer and head of the Nigeria office of the Open Society Initiative for West Africa, Jude Ilo, and the co-convener of the Center for Liberty, Ariyo-Dare Atoye. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. I'm wondering what else you see that is problematic about this bill, because it's not just that part, is it?
Charles, what we've seen is more or less like a subset of power or state capture. And this has been happening over time. It's an attempt at election capture, which, because we practice democracy and this is politics, and so everything is being done to also undermine the process of electing our leaders, so that it's also limited. There is also another provision that we talked about issue of electronic transmission of results, now removing the power of INEC to review. Now again, you now want to make it an exclusive preserve of a club of the billionaires. So a provision of election finance reform. Now, for a government that is fighting corruption, you should expect that this government will attempt to review even downward what its Senate did because of endemic nature of corruption in Nigeria.
That's a very good point, because I was going to come to that. Do you perceive that as an attempt to make it more likely to manipulate the process to benefit certain people?
It's a state capture. Within state capture, a lot of things are embedded. What that means is that you're going to widen the gap between the rich and the poor and destroy the middle class. So nobody will be able to have access. So they want to have an exclusive club of those who perpetually rule Nigerians. That's why they've done this. You increase the money to 15 billion of a presidential spending. We know that even though sometimes they spend more than this, but on paper, you see, this thing has a psychological effect on a nation, either we like it or not. This is one thing government should be doing. A government that is dutiful should be using a process like this to fight corruption, such that we are giving the people a sense of belonging, that if we reduce on paper our spending limit, then it helps to encourage young Nigerians. What about cap on the cost of nomination form and all of this? So what we've seen is that it is not, when you look at the way this thing has been doctored, it's a pure racket. It means that it's a sort of like an organized crime where some people say this is what we will do to remain perpetually in power, and that's exactly what and I think that when you analyze it properly, and I think this National Assembly should actually apologize to Nigerians and say we are not really part of this. But like I said, I want to pray and hope that they will come tomorrow and say that it was speculation and they were not part of it.
Okay, well, let's look at it this way, Jude. Is INEC, I think you mentioned this earlier, is INEC actually telling Nigerians how this will work against credible elections in the country? I mean, all these issues. Is that something that they ought to be saying? Because they're the ones who are charged with running credible elections.
I mean, my understanding is that the initial drafting of the bill benefited robustly from a set of recommendations that INEC did after their post-election assessments. So more or less, these provisions came from that assessment because INEC feels this will help their work. And like Ariyo mentioned, this has been tried before. This electronic transmission has been tried before, informally, to help INEC understand where there's crisis, where they needed to intervene, and all of that. And also allow political parties and observers to all have a better view of what's happening in the field. So it's been tried before. So it is, I'm not sure it is in INEC place at this moment to come out publicly and start to be seen to be working against the National Assembly, because these are the guys that manage their budget earmarks and all of that. So it might not be the best strategy. This is one of the situations where I feel Nigerians who believe in democracy should then protect that institution, which is INEC. So I think this is the time we're supposed to be fighting on behalf of INEC, not INEC fighting on its own. Because what is happening here has ramifications beyond just the election. And if I may also add, Charles, there's been a worrying trajectory in the last 2 to 3 years with respect to the way government has approached the democratic values that we hold here in this country. The civic space is shrinking. Media people are under harassment constantly. The electronic media are constantly fined, censored, I mean, in every way you can imagine, using the NBC. Now we have a Twitter ban. Now, when you create this space where it becomes increasingly difficult to have alternative voices, where it becomes increasingly difficult for Nigerians to speak up about what they want, and then you tie it into a clear manipulation of electoral process to get a desired outcome, it's pretty obvious that somebody somewhere is trying to hijack the state, because you wouldn't let the media do their work, you wouldn't let Nigerians talk on social media, you wouldn't even let their votes count. So in my view, this is a clear case of creeping authoritarianism
Well,
in the country.
that's a very interesting analysis. Let me ask you, Mr. Atoye, based on what he has said, what do you see as the prospects for a better democracy in Nigeria when you have to struggle to get something as fundamental as an electoral amendment bill passed, and passed according to the way that it was supposed to have been done?
Charles, I'm a bit really worried as a person, as an individual, honestly. Look at the picture painted by Jude. As a follow-up to that, you should expect a National Assembly that should be making Nigeria more endearing to agitators, separatists, and those who are actually threatening that we want to go our separate ways. You should make Nigerians more lovable. You should make the space so open and say, look, don't go. This is a better nation. That's the responsibility of the National Assembly. At this very point in time, what the same National Assembly is making more Nigerians to hate the country, to loathe the country, and it's totally unacceptable. The only way you can help a prosperous Nigerians is to give the people the latitude for their voices to be heard, for their terms to count in terms of electing the kind of leaders they would like to have. Do you know what it's going to do to Nigerians if tomorrow this bill is passed and people in the civil society and the media can come out and say, with what we've seen, with this amendment, you'll be able to vote and your vote will count. You will see the number of Nigerians that will start collecting their PVC. You will see the number of Nigerians that will be interested in democratic governance, because look, anytime there is always an alternative for the people, anytime there is always a path that the people can have hope, definitely you will see that joy and you will see the trickle-down effect on almost everybody. And that is what this National Assembly is denying Nigeria. At the time when there is this agitation, we shouldn't be doing this, because we'll be feeding. In fact, this attempt of manipulating constitutes a threat to national security. Okay, Mr.
Atoye, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and Mr. Ilo, I want to thank you very much indeed, and let's hope something positive comes out of the National Assembly tomorrow.